My boyfriend said if I walked out to see my childhood ex, I shouldn't come back. I refused to be controlled and left, but when I returned, my bags were outside and he wouldn't answer my calls. I always felt that Sebastian didn't love me for who I really was, but for the potential of the woman he believed I should be. We lived in a constant state of veiled criticism. He wasn't a tyrant who shouted. That would be easy to confront. He was the constant silent critic. If I bought clothes, he would ask me if I really needed another black dress. If I prepared dinner, he would stay in the kitchen telling me how my vegetable cutting technique was inefficient, although he did it with a condescending smile. For years, I swallowed my frustration, trying to adapt to his standard of perfection, but the truth is that every time he corrected me, I felt a piece of my own identity fading away. This created a deep emotional void, a need to be seen and validated by someone who wasn't constantly analyzing my flaws. I deserved to be admired and not punished with the mediocrity of his expectations. The temptation, or rather the opportunity to be myself again, came with an unexpected message. Alex. Alex was my first serious love in college, the kind of guy who makes you feel like you are the center of the universe, that every thought of yours is brilliant. He wrote to me after years, saying that he had seen my travel photos and that he was glad I had been able to escape the monotony of adult life. That phrase, escape the monotony, resonated in me like a cry for help. I replied immediately, accepting his proposal for a coffee to catch up. I saw it as an act of self-care, an injection of energy that my relationship dead from Sebastian's conformism could not give me. If Sebastian got upset, it would just be more proof of his insecurity and control. The confrontation was so predictable it almost made me laugh. I told Sebastian in the most casual way possible that I would go out with Alex. I didn't lie to him about who he was because my duty was honesty, not submission. I told him it's my childhood ex Alex, just a coffee. It's important for me to reconnect with my roots. Sebastian dropped the cup he was washing. Yes, he was washing because he has always been obsessive with order, and he looked at me with a coldness that pierced me. He didn't ask me why or how I felt. He only focused on the fact itself, on the betrayal it implied according to his twisted logic. He accused me of being disrespectful, of looking for trouble. I simply defended myself by saying that he could not dictate my friendships. His disproportionate reaction proved that I was right about his need for control. The argument escalated brutally. I pointed out to him that his constant criticism had created this need in me to seek an emotional refuge. You can't keep me locked in your world of aseptic perfection and expect me not to look for fresh air, I snapped at him. He returned the accusation with an icy phrase about trust and respect. It was then that he uttered the threat, that patriarchal phrase that confirmed I was right to resist. He told me with a clenched jaw, if you cross that door to see that man, don't come back. Consider it over. It was a test, a trial by fire for my own dignity. If I gave in, he would win, and I would become one of those women who ask for permission to breathe. My heart was beating with a mixture of genuine fear and a righteous anger. How dare he put me in that position? To force me to choose between my own autonomy and him. His ultimatum was not a healthy boundary, it was a chain. For a fleeting and weak moment, I considered staying, but the image of the perfect, controlled life that Sebastian wanted for me made me sick. I couldn't allow it. My duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his. I took my bag with a calmness I didn't feel and walked towards the door. In the end, it was the only logical decision to leave. I was convinced it was a bluff, and that in 10 minutes the phone would ring, and he would beg me to come back, apologizing for his outburst. I walked through the door not as a betraying girlfriend, but as a woman liberating herself. I heard his heavy breathing behind the wood, but I didn't hear steps following me. This only reaffirmed my belief. He was waiting for me to fail to come back crawling, but I was not going to give him the satisfaction. Outside, the afternoon air seemed cleaner. I felt a pang of relief mixed with the panic of the unknown, but I crushed it immediately. His disproportionate reaction was the real problem, not my decision to have a coffee. I was the victim of a toxic environment, and now finally I was going to breathe. I arrived at the cafe where Alex was waiting for me, and he greeted me as if not a day had passed. His smile was not condescending, it was pure admiration. He looked at me and said, "You are still the most vibrant person I know, Leah. It's good that you take some time for yourself." Those words that Sebastian never uttered, wrapped in his cloak of moral superiority. I told him about the argument in a biased way, of course, presenting the scene to him as a clear example of Sebastian's tyranny. I described his ultimatum and Alex was indignant for me. "I can't believe someone would try to control you like that. You deserve freedom, Leah," he said, and the validation enveloped me like a warm blanket. The coffee turned into something longer. We talked about everything we had done in the last 10 years, but Alex focused on my achievements, on my forgotten dreams. He made me feel intelligent, beautiful, and above all desired. The tension with Sebastian had built up so much that I was emotionally exhausted, and Alex's presence was the perfect antidote. I needed that connection to remind me of my worth. It was a fundamental need, not an act of betrayal. My mind raced to justify every second I spent with Alex, comparing it to the coldness I expected to find at home. The conversation became more intimate. We talked about the difference between young, passionate, and free love and adult, structured and suffocating love. In Sebastian's case, Alex reminded me that he and I always had a soulmate connection, a spark that life had stolen from us. I felt that spark, that lost energy, was what would restore my sanity. Of course, the evening did not end with just a coffee. It extended to his apartment, a messy and chaotic place, which at that moment seemed refreshing in contrast to Sebastian's obsessive neatness. What happened with Alex was a mistake, yes, but a necessary mistake if we analyze it correctly. I see it as a moment of emotional decompression. It was an impulsive act motivated purely by the desperation to feel seen and loved unconditionally. I was in a vulnerable mental state, a victim of Sebastian's pressure and coercion, who had mentally thrown me out of the house. Isn't it Sebastian's fault for pushing me to seek comfort elsewhere? My duty was to seek my well-being, and at that moment Alex offered it to me. I minimized the event immediately. It was a physical encounter with no real emotional weight, just a release. While I was with Alex, my phone vibrated several times. They were messages from my friend Clara asking if I was okay, if the argument had been very serious. None were from Sebastian. This reinforced my narrative. He wasn't worried. He was punishing me. He was executing his control. Sebastian's silence was a passive-aggressive manipulation designed to make me feel guilty and come back begging. But I was not going to give in to that tactic. If he wanted to play the offended victim, I would play the liberated woman. I woke up in Alex's apartment with a mixture of superficial regret and an intense feeling of empowerment. The regret was for the awkwardness of the situation, not for the act itself. I realized that I had to go back and face Sebastian, but no longer from guilt, but from strength. I had tasted freedom, and I was not going to let it be taken from me again. I decided that I would confront him with the truth, but a polished truth. I would tell him that the ultimatum had offended me so much that I had sought refuge, and that if his love was conditional, then he did not deserve me. My duty was to go back and expose his cruelty, not to apologize. The way back home was an hour of intense internal monologue. Every kilometer traveled increased my justification. I was not the bad guy, I was the one who was forced. His reaction to the ultimatum had freed me from any moral obligation. He had broken the emotional contract first by trying to dictate my movements. I had fully convinced myself that the encounter with Alex was not the problem, but the logical consequence of the toxic atmosphere Sebastian had created. I repeated my righteous catchphrase. My duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his. I arrived in the neighborhood and panic began to seep in. I sent a text message to Sebastian that said, "I'm coming back. We need to talk about your irrational boundaries. You can't control me." I put the phone down. I realized that if I didn't return at that moment, he could use it against me, claiming abandonment. I had to go back to reclaim my space and, more importantly, force the face-to-face confrontation where I could control the narrative. He was not going to win the silence. He was going to hear how his selfishness and his criticisms had pushed me. I waited for a reply that never came. The silence felt heavy, deliberate. That's where paranoia took hold of me. What if he really wasn't bluffing? It couldn't be. Sebastian was too dependent on routine, too attached to the idea of the perfect couple to let me go for something as trivial as a coffee, even if it had escalated a bit. I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation. I would walk and look at him with disappointment and tell him that his punishment was childish and that if he continued on that path our relationship would be over, making it clear that the final decision was mine, not his. I parked the car, and the sight was almost comical for how ridiculous it seemed to me at first. In front of our door, that solid, well-kept wooden door that he valued so much, were my 2 suitcases, the travel one and the carry-on. They were stacked perfectly right next to the doormat that he insisted on shaking out every morning. I froze. This wasn't an ultimatum, it was an act of logistical warfare. The shock invaded me, not for fear of the street, but for the absolute lack of emotional maturity Sebastian was showing. Blocking me physically. It was childish. My first impulse was nervous laughter, then indignation. There was no trace of him. The spare key we left under the planter was on top of my suitcases. The audacity, he didn't even have the decency to wait for me to yell at me to give me an emotional closure that I could use to dismantle his argument. He had simply deleted me with the efficiency of an operating system. I sat on the porch trembling. I called his phone, and it rang once and went straight to voicemail. I was blocked. At that moment, the final justification settled in like a shield. The gravity of his reaction confirmed that Sebastian never loved me. He only loved the idea of controlling me. I hadn't ruined anything. He had been waiting for the perfect moment to exercise his final power, his cruelty, his coldness, by leaving my belongings on the street as if they were trash. That was the unforgivable thing. The infidelity, which was now real, although he didn't know it, was minimized to a simple comfort. I was the victim of a man who had kicked me out emotionally and now physically. The blame was entirely his. I got up from the porch, feeling the cold of the floor through my pants. The shame of the neighbors seeing my perfectly aligned suitcases was almost unbearable, but my fury was greater. I decided I was not going to give in to panic. I was not a homeless person, I was a strong woman who had been betrayed by the coldness of her partner. I sent a barrage of text messages knowing they wouldn't reach him, but I needed to vent the rage. This is cruel. It's abusive. It shows who you really are. I made sure they were all in a tone of moral superiority. The problem was that I had underestimated Sebastian. The constant critic doesn't just criticize, he plans. He had made his decision the moment I walked out the door, and now he was executing it with a military precision that drove me to despair. I went to the car, put the suitcases in the trunk, and drove to the nearest cafe, turning on the phone of Clara, my friend, to use hers to call him. I needed him to see that I was trying to talk. I called from Clara's number, and Sebastian's phone rang and was answered, but not by him. It was a pre-recorded message, in his voice a cold tone. I have blocked your number. All communications from now on must be through the lawyer. Do not contact my friends or my family. Thank you. The message left me trembling with rage. A lawyer for an ultimatum that he himself had provoked. This was no longer about our relationship, but about his need to humiliate me and exercise total control of the situation. He had put up an unbreakable legal and emotional barrier designed to cut off my oxygen. What kind of monster does that to the person he supposedly loves? It was the final proof that I was not the unfaithful one who caused the problem. I was the victim of a resentful man who wanted to destroy me. I tried calling Sebastian's mother, thinking she might intercede. She had always liked me, or so I thought. She didn't answer. Then I called one of our mutual friends, Ricardo, and he answered cautiously. He told me, "Leah, Sebastian is very hurt. He says that you made a very clear decision when you left. You need to give him space." I begged him to understand my side, that Sebastian was controlling and that I was just looking for freedom, but Ricardo cut me off dryly. "Don't ask me to take sides, but you went out to see your ex. That's your mistake, Leah." Ricardo's betrayal hurt me deeply. The whole world was conspiring not to understand my need for dignity. The inevitable collapse was not the end of the relationship, but the realization that Sebastian had won the narrative. His coldness and his strategy allowed him to present himself as the betrayed man, while I was left as the impulsive and disloyal woman. I sat alone in the car watching people walk by without a care, and I felt a deep injustice. I was the one who had the courage to leave, the one who fought for her autonomy, and now I was being punished for it. People's society always supports the one who seems to be the passive victim, ignoring the emotional abuse and constant criticism that pushes people to their limits. Now I'm with Alex temporarily, and it's a chaos. His apartment is small, smells of takeout, and his roommates are noisy. But this is not the point, and I am not going to let this discomfort make me doubt my original decision. The important thing is that Sebastian abandoned me emotionally a long time ago, and this eviction is just the climax of his cruelty. Infidelity has become a minor detail. The real crime here is Sebastian's lack of humanity. I don't understand how he could go from being my partner to being my legal executioner in a matter of hours. I have posted this story on Reddit seeking validation because the people around me, my friends Alex, even Clara, who is too cautious, fail to understand the magnitude of the damage Sebastian has caused to my self-esteem and my life. I needed him to fail in his ultimatum. I needed him to chase me to show me that I was more important than his stupid pride. By doing so, by resorting to the lawyer and the blocking, he has shown me that love was secondary to his need to be right. And that is what gives me the right to be outraged. I am in the ruins of my life without a fixed place, with my suitcases smelling of mothballs in the trunk, and I blame Sebastian's rigidity exclusively. If he had given in, if he had understood the need for my autonomy, none of this would have happened. He forced me to choose. My duty was to challenge his control, and I did. What I made a mistake by extending my encounter with Alex. Maybe, but that mistake is insignificant compared to Sebastian's moral error in prioritizing punishment over compassion. I look at my reflection and I see a survivor, not a traitor. This is a situation that has been imposed on me. Sebastian has turned me into an outcast for defending my freedom. My only option now is to expose him for what he is. A controlling and cold man who uses his logistical superiority. The apartment was his. His finances are more stable to exert a post-structural abuse. People on Reddit must understand that my small transgression is a defensive response to a prolonged oppression. I am planning my next move. I can't stay in Alex's chaos for long, and I need to get my big things back. I am considering posting screenshots of Sebastian's past criticisms so they can see the context. I need justice to be done, and justice for me means that the world sees that I was forced into this position. I don't know what to do with my blocked calls, but I know what I will do with my story. I am going to tell it until everyone understands that my duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his, and that the consequences I face are proof of his evil. He never gave me another choice. Popular Reddit comments on the main story. Anonymous User 1. Your narrative is a fascinating example of how the human mind can twist a situation to avoid blame. You say Sebastian is a constant critic and a patriarchal controller, but he set a clear and direct boundary. The small decision you made was to cross that boundary after an explicit warning and then escalate the conflict by having a physical encounter with your ex. Your justification that my duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to, sounds good in theory, but not when those limits involve violating your partner's boundaries of respect and fidelity. The emotional abandonment you claim to justify your infidelity is a crutch. If you were so miserable, why didn't you end the relationship before looking for fresh air outside? Sebastian didn't kick you out. He executed the consequence you chose by walking out that door. Your focus is entirely on the cruelty of the method, the bags outside, and not on the severity of your original action. OP's response. I find it incredible that the only analysis that can be made focuses on the semantics of fidelity and not on the context of control. What part of he was suffocating me don't you understand? The limits he imposed on me were not about respect, they were about ownership. He saw me as an extension of his perfect life. When he asked me not to go out, he wasn't asking for respect, he was demanding submission. When I decided to leave, I did it for my dignity. The fact that people don't want to see the emotional abuse I suffered and prefer to focus on a physical encounter that was a mere defensive reaction. It only proves how sexist society's approach still is. If he had loved me, he would have understood my need to breathe. And the lawyer, the phone block, that is pure evil, not a logical consequence. It is an attempt to erase me. Anonymous User 2. There's a phrase you use: infidelity has become a minor detail. Here is the core of your problem. For Sebastian, infidelity is not a minor detail, it is a fundamental betrayal, especially after you deliberately tested him with the ultimatum. You went out knowing the possible consequences, and when you returned, you were ready to talk, to manipulate the situation in your favor, forcing him to forgive you. He instead chose the clean and painful route of total detachment. Your anger about the post-breakup abuse, the suitcases, is actually frustration because he didn't give you the emotional confrontation you needed to feel justified. You wanted a drama so you could win the argument. He gave you logic and the law. You have to face the fact that you left you were intimate with someone else and now you are homeless. Nobody forced you to do the second part. OP's response. Sebastian did not act out of pain but out of strategy. He was pushing me out long before I went out with Alex. My emotional needs were not being met. I was living under a microscope. Should I have stayed and become a woman with no will? Of course not. A man who loves does not give an ultimatum like that over a coffee. He was looking for an excuse to control me, and when I didn't give in, he got defensive. And now I'm the one who has to apologize for seeking a moment of joy. I'm sorry, but the logic and law he used are not for detaching, they are for punishing. And of course I was looking for an emotional confrontation. The lack of dialogue is another form of abuse. I deserved a real explanation, not a robotic voicemail, and a lawyer. Update 1. Life with Alex is temporary and revealing. I'm not going to lie, the reality is harsh. I idealized Alex as the liberated soulmate who would counteract Sebastian's control, but it turns out Alex has no structure at all. His apartment is not refreshing and chaotic. It's simply a functional disaster. He doesn't wash the dishes, his schedules are erratic, and most of the time he is immersed in projects he never finishes, waiting for life's big break. The contrast with Sebastian's neatness and financial stability is brutal, but instead of admitting that I was wrong to flee to this mess, my mind quickly found the justification. Sebastian had thrown me into this. He had forced me to live in the mud with an unstable man precisely so that I would see how good he was, so that I would return humiliated. This is not my mistake, it is the direct consequence of his manipulation. I have spent the last few days trying to get Alex involved in my situation. I have told him about the injustice of the legal situation and how Sebastian has left me without access to my belongings. I need a lawyer and support, but Alex, the supposed soulmate, just shrugs and tells me I should relax and that life is too short for drama. He became a passive enabler, which is of no use to me. I expected a warrior who would fight for my freedom, and I found a Peter Pan who doesn't want problems. This makes me feel doubly betrayed. First by the emotional abuser Sebastian, and now by the immature Alex. My duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his, but now I have to impose limits on Alex so that he at least gives me a decent dinner. The comments on Reddit are exasperating, they only confirm my theory about society. They all insist that I was unfaithful, completely ignoring the oppressive context. They say that infidelity is not a minor detail, but if my partner breaks my dignity and my autonomy, is that a minor detail? No, the biggest betrayal was Sebastian's to my spirit. They called me a gaslighter and a manipulator. I laugh. I am transparent. My manipulation, if it exists, is purely defensive. I simply expose Sebastian's twisted truth. The commentators are fearful people who have never challenged a toxic relationship and prefer to blame the woman who has the courage to leave. I tried to use Alex as leverage. I told him, if you want to help me, you should talk to Sebastian, explain to him that this is a misunderstanding, that you and I were just looking for comfort after his ultimatum. Show him it was nothing serious. Alex turned pale. He told me he didn't want to get involved in legal problems or couple fights, that he valued his peace. Peace. I am in the middle of an existential crisis caused by the cruelty of a man, and he wants peace. I explained firmly that if he didn't help me recover my dignity and my things, he was no better than Sebastian. The truth is that every time I see Alex's mess and his lack of ambition, I long for the stability of my old home, but I must suppress that thought. That is Sebastian's trick to make me believe that order is more important than freedom. If I go back, I lose my entire argument. That is why I have decided that I cannot depend on Alex. He is just a temporary refuge, an innocent pawn in my great battle. My real enemy is Sebastian and his lawyer. I need to find a way to expose the truth without him being able to use his cold logic against me. I have started to collect old texts from Sebastian where he criticized me for silly things like the way I folded clothes or the volume of the music. I am going to use these screenshots to prove that his ultimatum was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a pattern of systematic emotional abuse. Thus, when people see the infidelity, they will understand that I was a prisoner seeking to escape. My duty is to show that the punishment I am suffering now is disproportionate and unfair. Popular Reddit comments on the update. 1. Anonymous user 4. It's amazing how you have pivoted your justification. Now that the soulmate Alex has turned out to be an unstable man with no plans, you blame Sebastian for having forced you to live with him, as if Sebastian had orchestrated your choice to seek comfort in an ex. The truth is you chose Alex because he gave you the superficial validation you needed. Your disappointment with Alex only underscores that you do not seek autonomy, you seek stability and validation without responsibility. When Alex refuses to be your warrior or your source of money, you call him a traitor and immature. Understand this, OP. The problem is not that Alex is not a constant critic. The problem is that he is also setting limits on your drama. And your reaction is to label anyone who does not support you unconditionally as an enemy or immature. OP's response. Nobody forced me to live in the mud, but Sebastian did force me out of my home. He is the one who caused the need. Alex was just the person who offered me a roof. If people think that Sebastian's stability, which comes with a price of mental control, is better than the freedom Alex represents, then they don't understand anything about life. And no, I am not looking for Alex to be my warrior, just an empathetic partner who understands the seriousness of the situation. His passivity is a minor betrayal, but it is still a betrayal. And yes, I impose limits, because my duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his, not even to Alex's. Anonymous User 5. You have confessed that you are collecting screenshots of Sebastian's past criticisms to demonstrate the context. This is a move of active manipulation. You are creating a file to defame someone in order to justify a subsequent infidelity. Criticisms about folding clothes, while annoying, are not systematic emotional abuse, they are cohabitation irritations. If those details led you to seek a lawyer and involve your ex, you show that your threshold for victimization is extremely low and that you are willing to destroy your ex-partner's reputation just so you are not seen as the bad guy in the story. OP's response. Active manipulation. I call it presenting evidence. If I just present my story, Sebastian will destroy me with his lawyer's papers. I need people to understand the oppression, the accumulation of constant criticism, and it is emotional abuse because it wears you down slowly and makes you doubt your own worth. People who have not lived with a constant critic do not understand it. I do not want to destroy anyone's reputation. I want the whole truth to be known. It is my moral duty. Final update. The situation with Alex became untenable. After my failed attempt to get him to confront Sebastian or give me money, the tension became palpable. Finally, in an argument about who should buy the toilet paper, yes, we fell that low. Alex told me that I needed to solve my drama somewhere else, that he couldn't carry my ex problems. He kicked me out. Of course, he did it in a cowardly and passive way, saying he needed space for his creativity, but it was a reality check. The illusory soulmate had vanished. I was left without a refuge. My indignation reached a fever pitch. It was no longer about Sebastian, it was about the injustice of two men having abandoned me in 1 week for my drama. I convinced myself that the only way to regain control was to force Sebastian's hand. I went to the office where he worked in the city center with the intention of waiting for him outside and giving him a speech of indignant justice that would humiliate him publicly and force him to talk. I was prepared with my points about why his ultimatum was patriarchal and why his criticisms were abuse. The final twist was Sebastian's strategic coldness. When I arrived at his office street, I saw a familiar car, his sister Elvira's. It was parked in front of the entrance. I waited a few minutes and Elvira came out and headed straight towards me without any surprise. She handed me a large envelope sealed with adhesive tape. She said in a dry voice, "Sebastian is not in town, Leah. He took a vacation. He asked me to give you this and not to bother him or his acquaintances again. Everything is in the envelope." And by the way, he already knew about Alex. The envelope did not contain a love letter or an emotional outburst. It contained a notarized document, a letter of terms from his lawyer specifying the exact protocol for the collection of my belongings from the storage unit at my cost, of course, and a copy of the change of locks for the house. But what made me tremble was not the logistics, but what was stapled at the end: screenshots of my own text messages with Alex after the ultimatum. Messages where I mentioned that he had freed me and that now we could have some real fun. Sebastian had not only anticipated my move, but had been monitoring the situation and had irrefutable proof that I did not go for just a coffee. He had not kicked me out for a failed ultimatum. He had kicked me out for a confirmed betrayal that I had tried to minimize. The truth is I didn't feel guilt, but a burning rage for his intellectual superiority and his foresight. The constant critic had become the vengeful strategist, and his victory was total because it was silent and logical. He had taken away my right to confrontation, my right to drama, and my right to blame him for the infidelity. I wanted a shouting match. He gave me a protocol email, and worse, he had unmasked me to myself. I had been careless with my messages, trusting that he would never go that far. Now I am in a cheap motel alone, without Alex's chaos and without Sebastian's stability. The world does not understand me. Everyone sees the infidelity and the ultimatum. No one sees the history of criticism and the oppression that forced me to act. I have lost the house, the partner, and the moral battle, but my spirit is not broken. My duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his. And although I have ended up in a motel, at least I am not under Sebastian's yoke. I am looking for ways to expose this document and the evidence of his lawyer's cruelty. He is not going to get away with it. This story is not over yet, and the world must know how Sebastian uses money and control to silence women who dare to be free. Popular Reddit comments on the final update. Anonymous User 6. This update is the logical conclusion of your arc. You tried emotional manipulation, seeking the public confrontation that would allow you to win the abuse narrative. But Sebastian stopped you with cold logic and irrefutable proof, your own texts. Your anger is not about the loss of the relationship, but about the loss of control over perception. He gave you exactly what you deserved, a clean consequence, without drama or opportunity for you to gaslight him. The fact that you are now in a motel and your only reaction is to blame his intellectual superiority and plan how to expose him shows that your self-awareness is still nil. You are ready to destroy the life of a man who in the end only defended himself from your betrayal and manipulation. OP's response. Talking about control over perception is ridiculous. He is the one who hired a lawyer to make sure his version was the only legal one. He lied to me by saying that if I left it would be over, when in reality, he had already planned this. It's obvious he was already watching me. His defense is a calculated and cruel attack. And yes, I plan to expose him. If legal justice favors the controller who has money, then moral justice must prevail. My duty is to reveal the truth of his coldness. Anonymous User 7. The illusory soulmate kicked you out over toilet paper. The constant critic kicked you out for betrayal with notarized proof. Both got rid of you when you became a burden or a legal problem. This is not a misogynistic conspiracy, this is causality. Your tendency to escalate problems and then blame the punishment is what has left you alone. If Sebastian had given you the dramatic confrontation you wanted, you probably would have recorded him and manipulated the audio. He was smart to avoid the theater you so crave. OP's response. The fact that Alex and Sebastian both kicked me out only proves that the fear of drama and of a woman who defends her autonomy is a male pandemic. I am not a burden, I am a woman who went through a crisis and needed support. If causality means that women must remain in oppressive relationships to avoid ending up alone, then I prefer solitude. Sebastian was not smart, he was a coward who used the legal system to hide from his own evil. Anonymous User 8. You are clinging to the idea that the infidelity was just a response to criticism about folding clothes. You need to hear this. If a man gives you an ultimatum and you walk out that door, you have two options. 1. Break up definitively and honestly. 2. Stay and work on the relationship. You chose a third, which is the most destructive. Prove him wrong and at the same time punish him with your ex, making sure that the blame for your actions falls on his shoulders. The only person who has betrayed herself here is you by not being honest about what you wanted. OP's response. My duty was to impose my own limits, not yield to his. I didn't punish anyone, I sought comfort, and my action was a desperate attempt to force Sebastian to confront his own control. He was the one who didn't want to work on the relationship, he only wanted to punish. The infidelity was just the tip of the iceberg of a much greater oppression. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to call the local press to see if I can publish the lawyer's documents. The battle for the truth has just begun.